Hello Animorphs fans and welcome back to the Animorphs universe. We're doing episode 50 of AniLysis, and it's strange to know that I've gone that far in. Stranger to know how far there is left to go, because we are covering everything in this series, and today we're covering a very special character. And you may notice that everything is red, assuming I don't keep knocking things because it's knock sensitive. We're covering a very lovely character today whose name is Crayak. And I say he's lovely, being entirely ironic, because he is the epitome of evil, and deliberately so in this series, represented here by the Eye of Sauron, who's basically the influence for this character, as we will see. But the first thing we're going to do is chronologically look at where we first discovered Crayak. And it comes in the Ellimist Chronicles, the first time chronologically we discover Crayak. Let's see the situation as it unfolds. Via quotes. I returned to find no signs of life on the Jalian world. The planet was sterile, its atmosphere almost gone. The inner world still teemed with life, but I caught no sign of microwave or radio or laser emissions. No satellites orbited the planet. The inner worlders were reduced in numbers and existing at a primitive technological level. Many of the minds had been annihilated by my meteor cloud, but many had survived, and then survived re-entry to explode on contact with the surface of the Jalian planet. Even now, 1,000 years later, the radiation could be read. Even now the craters could be seen from space. Morbidly, I went about the work of compiling every detail. More than 700 impacts, 700 nuclear explosions. Not such an easy game to win, is it? For a moment I thought the voice was my own. The tone of sarcasm and deprecation mirrored my own self-directed rage. But then my senses lit up. Something was emerging from Z-space. Something big. I spun, readied my defences, still confident that nothing, no matter how unexpected, could really challenge me. But the ship that appeared suddenly in normal space was nothing I had ever seen. Nothing that any of my multitude had ever seen. This ship was not a ship. It was a planetoid, large enough to be a small moon, and yet it was Z-space capable. Incredible. Impossible. An illusion, it had to be. I swept the planetoid with my senses and I could literally feel the entity's acquiescence. It invited me to look. It did not care. It did not fear me. There were life forms on the planetoid, perhaps 20,000, in a wide array of species, most naturally evolved, but some, I suspected, were experimental, created. But there was only one life form that truly concerned me. My senses showed lines of power, raw, snapping power connecting this one creature to all other life forms. The Ellimist, the creature said with a laugh I heard deep in my mind. I have seen your handiwork in many places through this galaxy. I am pleased to meet you at last. I've been looking for you. I could not see him. He hid his face from me. You know my name, I said, trying to conceal any slight sign of fear or agitation. Oh, but you're famous in so many places. The great cosmic do-gooder. You have the advantage of me, I said. I do not know you. Then he showed himself to me. I saw with a shock that he was like me, as much machine as biological, but his biology was entirely different. He was evolved for the surface, or perhaps even for subterranean life. No wings would ever lift those massive, muscled limbs, and no creature with that single dominating red eye could ever navigate easily in 3 dimensions. I am called Crayak. Of course, that's just my game name. He laughed a knowing laugh, a ridiculing, belittling sound. You are a gamer? Aren't we all? No longer, I lied. I no longer play a game. I do what I can to make this a better galaxy. Well, you've done a wonderful job of that here, Crayak said. I can see plainly what happened. Your clever debris barrier gave them the idea of using nuclear mines. One planet destroyed the other, and, lacking a foe, lacking a challenge, the destroyer itself fell into barbarism and decay. Yes, quite a nice job. It was true. There was no doubting it. Part of me wondered how it was that Crayak could read the signs so well, but mostly a single phrase went round and round in my head. Brilliant loser. I had lost. With all the best of intentions, I had annihilated one species and reduced another. You have been following me? I asked Crayak. Yes. He waited. He knew what I wanted to ask, but he would make me ask it of him. How many others like this? Not many, Crayak said. No, often you've succeeded admirably. Your solution to the Mammoth-esque self-annihilation game was brilliant, subtle, effective. You redirected them to a life of productive peace. I had to go in and destroy them myself. I'd begun to revive a little as he described my success. Then his last statement. You did what? I reversed the effects of your meddling, Crayak said. The Mammoth-esque reverted to cannibalism when they experienced repeated crop failures. A plant parasite. Impossible for them to stop. But as you know, cannibalism is a losing adaptation. The Mammoth-esque are effectively extinct. Are you mad? I cried. No, I don't think so, Ellimist. I'm just a gamer, like you, but with perhaps different philosophy. I don't play the game to save the species, but to annihilate it. I play the game of genocide. This galaxy has even more potential games within it than the galaxy I left behind. I will cleanse this galaxy of all life too. Then, when no sentient thing is left, I will kill you, Ellimist. That's my game. Shall we play? That is the introduction of Crayak. And it's bizarre. So the context of this is the Ellimist has absorbed Father. We know you should know the Ellimist story. And he's become this part technological, part biological being that's just become this entourage, just like army of ships and planetoids and what have you. Mostly just ships, maybe just exclusively ships. But he goes around spreading justice wherever he can place it. And doing the right thing. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, quite almost literally out of nowhere, this similar being appears called Crayak, or what he calls himself as Crayak. And he implies that it's his gamer name, but whether that is true, or whether he's just doing it to mock the Ellimist, because apparently he knows the Ellimist story, somehow. That's his gamer name, and that's all we ever know him by, Crayak. That's all we ever know him by. How does he know about the Ellimist? Why is he doing what he's doing? We aren't really given much. We are given something, a little snippet later on down the line, but we'll get to that when we get to that, and then we'll speculate at the end. But effectively, he's just as powerful as the Ellimist. So the Ellimist sees himself as, and rightly so, as this most powerful being. This almost unstoppable force. And nothing challenges him. Until Crayak turns up, with very similar stuff going on. And the way he's described is this, hi Lila, this planetoid. So basically think of a moon, and it's got a population on it of various different races, or species if you want to say that. But somewhere on this planet, and we're not sure if it's in like the core of it or just on the surface somewhere, is this single being called Crayak. It's mentioned that he is like the Ellimist in that he's both biological and technological. And for context, the Ellimist was a Ketran, and then his Ketran body sort of died, but he assimilated himself with a whole load of technology and kept himself alive. So his body is still there, but it's almost like meshed in with technology. It's become part of like a computer system. And that's what I'm suspecting has happened to Crayak here. So whether this is like an alternate universe sort of thing, you know, like the multiverse theory, freaking multiverse theory, we see a lot of that these days. But whether this is like the mirror version of Crayak, come from he says another galaxy. But maybe it's from another universe. We're not quite sure, but we can speculate on that. And perhaps someday I will speculate on the origins of Crayak. But we're just working with what we've got here for this analysis. We're dealing with what we do know. He's surrounded by beings on this planet that are partly of his own creation and partly naturally evolved. So we can assume maybe that he'd always been on this planetoid with the naturally evolved creatures, and something happened down the line where he was the last of his race. Sort of very similar to how things went with the Ellimist. And somehow he amalgamated himself with all these computers and technologies and stuff and took over this planet almost like a king on this thing. Part of me thinks, when I'm reading it, oh, he must be at like the core of the planet, but thinking about it logically, he's probably just somewhere on the surface, but he's in control of all the races around him. That must be sentient to some degree. If not, you can only imagine that the ones he created are creatures like the Howlers. So I'm imagining, we'll get to the Howlers, but I'm imagining that some of the creatures he's created that are on this planet are Howlers, and potentially the Droid and members of that particular race. So Howlers and Droid, or whatever the species are called, because Droid is his name. The Droid race and the Howlers are on this planetoid, and he's in charge of it all. He's the one, controlling everything, and he's incredibly powerful. So much so that he's able to do basically what the Ellimist does and influence the surroundings of planets or the actions that happen on planets. So much so that creatures can be destroyed, annihilated, yada yada yada. We also get an idea of what he evolved from. So whereas the Ellimist is a Ketran and evolved to be up in the air on these giant crystals, the Crayak, or the creature, the race that Crayak is from, was subterranean. So that implies, hold on, let me just check. Surface or subterranean life. He's got muscular limbs and a single big red eye. So look at this thing and put it on the front. It's like basically a cyclops, this creature. In fact, from the little descriptions we do get, you could say it's basically like a cyclops. No creature with limbs that big could be lifted by wings, and no creature with that single eye can operate nicely in 3 dimensions. So that is why the Ellimist sees Crayak and says this must be from a race that is subterranean, or at least surface level, so it doesn't go up in the air. We don't get much more on that, and that's basically the limit to what we know about this race. There's some other little things as well. So this creature is obviously capable of communication, of laughter, of being sarcastic, so all that sort of stuff. The creature that is Crayak is capable of those things, implying that the race he evolved from was also capable of those sorts of things. And we will eventually do an analysis specifically about the Crayak race, or what the race that he came from. So let's move on from that now. Let's move on to the next thing, which is the games that the Ellimist and Crayak play when they first meet each other. How many years, how many decades had I played Father's games, losing every game, until by sheer luck I found the game he could not win. I couldn't afford to lose that way to Crayak. Game pieces had become real beings. We played for real lives. When I played the weaker side, I had to save. He had only to destroy. And yet, here is the shameful truth. I needed Crayak as Father had needed me. Crayak disappeared into Z-space, and I followed him as well as anyone can follow another through that shifting nothingness. I found him waiting for me in a solar system with 3 inhabited planets. Crayak had already been some days in the system. He had laid out his game pieces with terrifying ruthlessness. Here is the game Ellimist, 3 worlds, each inhabited by a sentient race, Lager, the Folk, and the Capucins. I believe you may know of the Capucins. There are 3 asteroids strategically placed, 3 impacts within the next 5 minutes of time. Except that one of those asteroids has already been mined and will explode into harmless debris before it can hit. You have my word on that. The word of a mass murderer. Yes, but an honest murderer, he said, and laughed at his own wit. This is the first game they play, so they shoot off into Z-space, so obviously Crayak is capable of travel. Basically, his level matches the Ellimists. What was that noise, Lila? What are you on about? And he travels to this place with the Lager, the Folk, and the Capucins. We've covered the Lager before in an AniLysis, by the way. Go check that out. And this is the first game they play. He basically says, here's 3 planets. There's asteroids heading to each of them. One of them will just explode in the atmosphere and cause no bother. Right, Ellimist, you got to choose one of them to save. You got 5 minutes. And we get an instant idea of how manic and a bit crazy this Crayak seems to be. It's basically the opposite of the Ellimist. And the Ellimist tries to save it. And then Crayak moves on. A huge explosion blossomed, a red fireball against black space. The explosion consumed what was left of the Capucin asteroid. Wrong. I had guessed wrong. I powered, full speed, to intercept the Lager asteroid. Fast. Faster. Too far to fire with any effect. Fire anyway. I aimed, fired, watched my beams impact the distant asteroid. Too far away. And then the asteroid was within the shadow of the planet. There are no shockwaves in space. I did not feel the impact, but I could see the green and blue of the Lager shudder. Their orbit is badly destabilized, Crayak observed. You can see that they will slip slowly, then faster, wobbling, torn by shattering earthquakes, slide down and down the gravity well, atmosphere boiling away, suffocating, a few surviving in trapped pockets of air, till of course they are roasted alive by their own sun. Some of them can still be saved, I cried. Yes, and you can stay here and save them, Ellimist. Or you can follow me to the next game. Save a few of these creatures, or perhaps save entire worlds. Your choice. It's all part of the game. His powers were greater than mine. He toyed with me, mocked and ridiculed me. Worlds died and the galaxy grew emptier, and years passed, centuries, millennia, and always I saved only a few, never all. How had I beaten Father? By possessing a talent he lacked. But music would not stop Crayak. At last I lit my engines in the wreckage of yet another planet and escaped into zero space with Crayak's triumphant howls in my ear. At last I lit my engines in the wreckage of yet another planet and escaped into zero space with Crayak's triumphant howls in my ears. No more. No more game. Not until I found a way. Because Crayak's job is much easier than the Ellimists, that being destroying things rather than creating them, that's understandable. It's called entropy. It takes energy to keep a system going. All you need to do is take that energy away and everything crumbles. So Crayak's got the easy job of destroying things. So he has the Ellimist beat, and everywhere he goes, Crayak wins, much like Father always won the games against Tumin before the whole assimilation thing. So the Ellimist thinks, right, I need to actually back away here and take a time out and figure out what I need to do. And this is where we first discover the Andelites chronologically. He goes down to the Andelite planet and sends basically the Jesus version of himself down to the Andelites. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, I did it in my review of the book. Basically, it's the same way how Jesus is God, but he's not whole God, he's just like a part of God. He's the son of God. So he's just got certain bits of God thrown in by God himself and put there. So in the similar way, Ellimist sends a smaller version of himself to the Andelite planet. It says, you can have this bit, this bit, this bit, off you go. See how it goes. So it's the son of God sort of thing. And he sends it down to the Andelite planet. And that's where he comes up with his idea. Because he sees what effect he has on that planet, and a light bulb flickers in his head, and he has an idea of how to beat Crayak. I'd gone there making sanctimonious noises about learning, never really expecting to learn anything new, and yet from these primitive, pre-civilized creatures I had learned how to defeat, or at least resist, Crayak. More children, some live. For every race Crayak exterminated, I would plant 2 new ones. 100,000 generations passed, and I had seeded life on as many worlds. I was growing children faster than Crayak could exterminate them. I had the advantage now. Crayak had to try to find my new species, simple peoples who did not announce their presence with radio emissions, primitive species hiding amidst the billions of planets. And for the first time, I grew a wholly new species. They were invented in my body/ship, created of bits and pieces of DNA. I accented their intelligence. I quashed their aggressiveness. I called them Pemalites. This is the Ellimist's great plan. Plant more life than he can exterminate. And make it the life subtle enough so that he can't just instantly say, right, what's that going on over there? You know, something subtle. The Pemalites were the creation of the Ellimist. And then, of course, further down the line, the Pemalites create the Chi. Whether that means the Chi are the good guys, debatable. And, you know, there's the whole Chi-spiracy. But, well, my thoughts, spoiler alert, my thoughts on that are that, you know, much like the Howlers were a hive mind, and Jake was able to taint them, the Chi are a hive mind, the Chi net, and perhaps Crayak was able to taint them. Just saying. But yeah, he's created this really peaceful race, and he's doing all this stuff, making more lives than Crayak can create, and they go a bit mental. It becomes a massive old battle in a little bit. So let's look at what happens next. Not even Crayak could find them all, nor even a fraction of them all. Life was winning the race against death. Good was outrunning evil. In all that time, millennia, I had not encountered Crayak, but eventually we must meet. It happened without warning. I emerged from Z-space in a previously unvisited solar system. A massive jolt hit me before I could so much as switch on my sensors. An energy beam of shocking power. For a split second, I was simply overwhelmed. Every system flickered. Every synapse and connection stuttered. It was a blow that would have killed me 10,000 years earlier. But I was no longer quite the creature I'd been when Crayak had last seen me. I had followed the same theory for my own survival as I had for the survival of life itself. I had grown, replicated, expanded. Crayak still inhabited his dark, gloomy world, still surrounded himself with sycophants and toadies, still possessed the weapons and abilities he'd had, and now his power was not so much greater than mine, if at all. "It seems I've survived," I said to him. "Let's see if you do as well." I aimed and I fired with everything I had. Crayak's dark planetoid staggered. Huge chunks the size of mighty mountains, exploded into space. "You've grown," Crayak sneered. "And you have not. Life has advantages over death." "Only the most temporary advantages, Ellimist. Life is short. Death is eternal." "You race from place to place, a fool trying to stamp out a contagion. You're too slow. Life has outrun you." "Life, no. But you, Ellimist, yes. You have complicated my plans, so now, with deep regret, I must end our little game." "I see. You like the courage to play a game that you might lose. A coward, after all." "A survivor, Ellimist." He fired. The battle was on. So their philosophies continued. Crayak, in this world of, or this philosophy of death and destruction, didn't think to grow, to add to what he had. Whereas the Ellimist added and became even more powerful, so that they were basically on a level playing field again. And this is where my Dragon Ball Z picture comes into my head. This is like Goku and Frieza this part now. So he's obviously been hit by an energy beam and he's staggered, but he's come back from his time away even more powerful. He's over 9,000 now. And then this proceeds, and it's basically Goku and Frieza on the Namek planet, with the planet being destroyed all around them. Just think of that when you're listening to these quotes. "I chased him into zero space. We carried our battle into another system. The two of us orbited a massive star and sucked the energy from it to keep hacking away at each other. We hurled asteroids. We warped the form of space itself. We stabbed at each other with energy beams. Crayak ran again, and I followed him. The taste of victory was in my mouth, the hunger for revenge and vindication. I struck at him with beams of energy powered by a star. Unimaginable force. I missed and struck a planet and vaporized an ocean. The species that inhabited that world would not last more than a year on their damaged world, but there was no time to stop. I told myself I would make it all right when Crayak was dead. I told myself I would come back when Crayak was gone once and for all. But it was I who ran from the next battle, and the next. Crayak had learned from me. He added to his own powers, and so did I. We had become symbiotic at some level. Neither of us could kill the other. Neither of us could pull away because now after so much time, now the other was even stronger. The destructive power we had now employed annihilated solar systems in their entirety. Civilizations that had barely raised their heads to look at the stars were obliterated. Advanced worlds, arrogant with their space travel abilities, watched, helpless, stunned, and were annihilated. It's just gone a bit mental at this point. They're both just becoming more and more powerful as they learn from each other. They're bouncing between each other and just becoming basically exponentially more powerful to the point where their fighting is basically just obliterating everything around them. Planets, solar systems. As soon as they come near, it's just like everything explodes. That's how powerful they've become. Just incredible levels of power. They're going Super Saiyan. They're reaching their final forms and what have you. And, the Ellimist, this is, by the way, something that I'm going to bring up later again. Crayak is very clever in how he does things. He makes it so that you do the bad thing. He makes it so, he creates the evil, but then in order for the evil to be defeated, the good guy has to do an evil thing. So it's almost self-fulfilling whatever, but he makes good people do bad things, which is probably the most evil thing of all, really. But the Ellimist is now going around, and in this fight, he's destroying things. He's doing Crayak's job for him in trying to defeat the evil, which is I like that. I like that. Not the thing itself, but I like this. I like the plot. I like the Machiavellianness about it. Is it Machiavellian? What Crayak's doing here? Probably. He probably does all sorts of Machiavellian stuff. It's basically the same with the Yeerks. I'm going to say it now. The Yeerks are brain slugs, and they're Crayak's new toys. And they crawl into a host's ear. And in order for the Yeerk to be defeated, you've got to defeat the host, which is an innocent civilian, which, you're killing an innocent to get at a Yeerk. I hate to make it topical, but look at Israel-Hamas now. Hamas hides behind civilians. So in order for Israel to get Hamas, they've got to go through the civilians. It's very, very similar to some of the stuff that happens in Animorphs. And then you ask yourself, well, who's the good guys here? Who's the good guys? It's one of those questions, and I'm not going to answer it here. I'm not going to pretend to know what's right and what's wrong here. But that's the sort of questions we're dealing with. And Animorphs prides itself on asking those very, very difficult questions. But alas, they become too powerful. And it all comes to a head when the Ellimist falls into one of Crayak's traps. It was a hideous race to see which would happen sooner, my triumph over Crayak or our mutual destruction of all life in the galaxy. And then, sheer accident took Crayak and me down a path neither of us had known existed. Crayak laid a trap for me. He was ready to gamble anything, so he began to move with a definable pattern. He deliberately laid the groundwork for me to guess his next move. It worked. I read his pattern and foolishly ascribed it to exhaustion on his part. Thus it was that I emerged from zero space within a few 100,000 miles of a force that neither I nor Crayak could hope to defeat. A black hole. The pull of the black hole was impossible to fight. I had great power, but I did not have this power. My most forward portions fell into that gravity well with no chance at all of escape. Crayak had laid the trap to perfection. I was everywhere at once, lost, turned, twisted. In Z-space, in real space far away as parts of me emerged randomly, and falling into the horrible crushing mouth of the black hole. I was bits and pieces. Those are my eyes and ears spread out through space and non-space, stretched. I felt the connection break, felt as if parts of my body were being sawed off. Pain. My mind was closing in, collapsing. No. Fragments. Pieces of me. Distorted cries and shouts of wild, disjointed communication. I seemed to float in a place like nothing I had seen or imagined. All around me I saw massive twisted lines of pure power, snapping and colour shifting. I saw numbers, deluges of them. I could hear them roaring around my ears. I reached out a vast hand and can run it over the curves of space itself. I could stroke the very curves of space-time. I saw everything. The inside, underside, inner and outer of everything at once. This is where it all gets very, very sci-fi. Like incredibly sci-fi. Freaking cat hair everywhere, Lila. So he's in normal space and he travels through Z-space and emerges in another part of real space, and there's a black hole there. Crayak's laid this trap. But we've got to remember the context of this. So what is the Ellimist? He is at this point just an army of ships, like thousands and thousands, perhaps even millions of ships, all carrying parts of him. It's all like this hive mind of Ellimist. And so some of it is still probably pre-zero space in old space over there. Some of him is in zero space, and the front portion of him has now emerged into a new part of space, and there's a black hole there. And so some of those portions are being sucked into this gravity well of this black hole. And so all at once, he's in this portion of space, he's in zero space, he's in this portion of space, and now he's been sucked into this black hole, into this non-space, wherever the black hole leads. So in typical weird sci-fi fashion that nobody can really explain, but it works because it's sci-fi, he is now everywhere at once, and he's beneath everything. He's like looking at the fabrics of how everything works. That's where he now is, somehow. And obviously the Crayak is still out there somewhere. He's not been sucked in. And he starts to obliterate all of the Ellimist portions, but as we'll see from these quotes, it doesn't kill any of him. I was aware of Crayak. I felt him approach my real space portions. He was attacking me piecemeal, exploding parts of me with great glee. I felt physical parts of me evaporate, burned away by energy beams, and yet my mind was not diminished. One by one, Crayak annihilated the component parts of me, hundreds of them, thousands of them. And when nothing was left of me in real space, he chased me into zero space and squeezed those helpless, inanimate bits of machinery and flesh and crystal out into real space where they could be destroyed. And still, I lived. I saw Crayak out there, still at his evil work. I saw lines go dark, unravel, coil up into nothingness as he massacred planets. Billions of lives became nothingness. I had planted a great deal of life, and my Pemalites still lived to spread more. But the tide was turning once more in Crayak's favour. At last, knowing I had so much more still to learn, knowing my own deep inadequacy, I struck back. So now the Ellimist is in this weird thread universe. So we see that, a fair few times when we encounter the Ellimist from this point on, chronologically. He's in this weird place, and he doesn't know quite what's going on. He's not in reality as we know it. He's in the thread world, and he can touch things here and there. And he can still see Crayak doing his little bits, and he sees races as threads going through, and he sees them dimming and dying out as Crayak carries on his evil deeds. And Crayak, as far as he knows, the Ellimist is gone. He's done. Game over. But the Ellimist, because of what happened with this black hole, is now basically a god. There's not really much of a word for it. He is a god. And not in the religious sense that we see it, but in the maybe, I don't know. But anyway, he sees Crayak doing that, and he eventually decides, I can now figure out how this stuff works, and I'm going to strike back at Crayak. I'm going to foil his plans once again. Crayak entered a system of 9 planets orbiting a medium yellow star. 2 of the worlds, a red planet and a blue, were populated. The red planet was already doomed. Its atmosphere was oozing away, and Crayak could do no real harm there. But the blue planet teemed with life. There was intelligence there, but no sentience. I could see it so clearly. Not in the great domineering brutes, but in a handful of small, swift, fur-bearing prey animals did the future of this world lie. They had only to be left alone, and in 40 or 60 million years, there would emerge a great people. Crayak saw none of this. He saw only that there was life there. He aimed his weapons at the blue planet and fired, and I drew gently on the fabric of space-time and his weapons struck nothing. The planet was gone, halfway around its orbit. He tried again, and each time I applied my crude but powerful countermeasures, and then, in confusion, Crayak withdrew to consider. I knew he would be with me soon. Crayak is no mug. He knows that the Ellimist has probably got something to do with what's going on here, because he's the only being that's been powerful enough to resist him to any degree. So, yeah, Crayak knows, hold on, this is the Ellimist, and I don't know what he's done, but I haven't seen him since that black hole incident, and by Jove, he's figured out some way to do something from within that thing. It is strange, though, because the Ellimist is stopping... It's very clear that they talk about the dinosaurs. 40 to 60 million years ago. What happened about 60 million years ago? 65? The dinosaurs got hit by... Well, we believe got hit by an asteroid. Or meteor, or whatever the proper definition, the proper word is. And wiped out the dinosaurs effectively. Mostly. Birds are still technically dinosaurs. Let's get scientific about this, shall we? But, yeah, the way it's written here, Ellimist stops any of these big things hitting the planet. So, the dinosaurs didn't die out. One of them must have hit in order for that to happen. Or did the Ellimist do it just a little bit further on in order to clear a path for the humans to emerge? But then you ask the question of, well, he wouldn't be wiping out, these dinosaurs, why would he wipe them out? That's not the Ellimist's game. That's not what Ellimist does, is it? Who knows? It's entirely down to speculation. We do see that in Megamorphs 2 that an asteroid does indeed come down. And we've got to remember as well, how could I forget? The Nesk and the Makora are on Earth at this point in time. But the Ellimist doesn't see them. Very strange. Very, very strange. And is it basically just a plot contrivance? Is it a plot? Is it an inconsistency? A contradiction in plot? That's for another video some other day. Right now we're talking about Crayak. So forget the Nesk and Makora and the Ellimist being weird about Earth. So Crayak sees this going on and thinks, okay, right, something's happened here. Last time I saw him, he went into a black hole. And somehow he survived that and become even more powerful and more subtle. So what does Crayak do? He finds a way to get back to the Ellimist. So here you are, Ellimist. I've been expecting you, Crayak. He appeared to me as he always had, as a dark monster. Your advantage is gone, Ellimist. We are equals now, I agreed. You can no longer harm me personally. You understand that? I cannot harm you, Ellimist, but I can hurt you. I can kill the things you love. You can try, Crayak, but in the end you're a fool. Do you not see that everything you do I can undo? You can slaughter and I can reverse time itself to restore life. But I tell you this, if we carry on our war inside the bowels of space-time itself, we will end by collapsing this universe and killing ourselves, as well as everything in it. It is a pointless game that has no winner, Crayak admitted. But what else is there for the two of us? We could watch. We could admire the advance of evolution. Unacceptable. I would choose my own destruction over that. To live for all of eternity as a passive observer. There must be a game. If there is no game, there is nothing for me. Then let us play a game, Crayak. There will have to be rules. Yes, there will have to be rules. And a winner? That too. Though it will take millions of years. Crayak smiled his hideous smile. I'm not going anywhere. Then come, I said. Let us play the final game. And there we have it. That's basically the end of the Ellimist Chronicles. It's not explained how. As much as it's never explained how Crayak emerged in the first place, it's never explained how he reaches the Ellimist again. One can only speculate, as happens a lot here, And the speculation is that he repeated the process by which the Ellimist got trapped in this black hole by spreading himself through multiple points of space, zero space, and the black hole. But there's also that funny little bit where it's said that he appears to the Ellimist exactly as he had appeared before. But what we must also remember, and it wasn't in the quote there, the Ellimist appears to Crayak as he wishes for himself to appear. He wished for himself to appear as a Ketran to Crayak. So theoretically, the same thing could happen to Crayak, and he's this disembodied thing, but he can choose to appear how he wishes, and he wished to appear to Ellimist as he had always done before, as this planetoid, and somewhere on that the Crayak monster presided. So that is that, and basically they just become two guys sitting in a room playing video games. That's the sort of feel you get at the end there, where they're just saying, well, what should we freaking do now? I don't know, let's play more games. Like the two characters from Shaun of the Dead, just at the end of the movie, sitting, one of them's a zombie now or something, and they just might as well play video games. And they were playing Time Splitters, if I remember correctly, which is a brilliant game, by the way. One of my favourite ever games in general, not just PlayStation 2 games. The best console for games, PlayStation 2. Don't at me, it's scientific fact. Now that they're both in the bowels of space-time, Crayak's look around saying, oh yeah, I'll get your point, you know, if we mess around in here too much, then that's basically it, we destroy everything, so we might want to tone it down a bit. Even though his intended goal from the start was to destroy everything, you know, maybe he's matured, he's come out of his punk phase, and he's now in his alternative rock phase, Crayak. I don't know. But even at this point, even though his previous motto was, destroy everything, everything can burn as far as I'm concerned, he's now in this room saying, you know, maybe destroying everything is a bit too much. And he just says, right, let's just have some fun. Let's play a game. I want to destroy everything. You want to save everything. Let's get the remotes out, sit in front of the universe and just play. And that's where we go from here. And that's effectively part one of this AniLysis. So I'm going to take a break here. You're going to just see me snap straight back into action, but I'm going to take a break, give my voice a rest, and we'll do part two of this, what's going to be probably a very lengthy AniLysis. Okay, so what happens next is we get involved with the Animorphs side. Because remember, we're doing this chronologically, and I think there's a very good reason to do it chronologically, because we've seen the origins of Crayak and his purpose, what he's doing, what he's done in the past, what his aim is, and what he's now doing with the Ellimist. Let's see how that translates into the world of the Animorphs. Let's go! Oh, I'm back again. So let's carry on with part two of our AniLysis of Crayak. The first part was basically just the Ellimist Chronicles. Now we go into Animorph stuff. And where do we first see Crayak in the Animorphs portion? It's in book 6, and the Yerk in Jake's head is dying, because obviously he was made a controller in that book, and the Yerk is dying, and this is what Jake sees. The Yerk shuddered. I could feel it. A physical spasm. My vision changed. I felt... it's hard to describe. I felt as if I was seeing through things, into things, like I could see the front and back and top and bottom and inside of everything all at once. And then I saw it. A creature, or a machine, some combination of both. It had no arms. It sat still, as if unable to move, on a throne that was miles high. Its head was a single eye. The eye turned slowly, left, right. I trembled. I prayed it would not look my way. And then it saw me. The eye, the blood-red eye, looked straight at me. It saw me. It saw me. No, no! I cried in silent terror. I looked away. And when I opened my eyes again, all I saw was a weird glow. The glow faded, little by little. Now, forgive me for throwing around accusations, but it's a bit too close to what was in Lord of the Rings. It's a bit like, yeah, I'm just going to steal that idea. I mean, if you're going to steal an idea, at least take it from something not many people know of. Not like one of the biggest fiction pieces in history. It's a bit pathetic. But regardless of originality, this is the first we see of Crayak, and this, by the way, takes place in Book 6, which happens before we meet the Ellimist. So we meet Crayak before we meet the Ellimist. And it looks just like this. In fact, if you just pictured Sauron in Lord of the Rings as the big tower, that's basically how it's described here. This big tower that's called a throne, about a mile high, and on top of it there's just this big eye that's looking left and right until it sees Jake. Sorry, Frodo. No, sorry, yes, Jake, it was Jake. But that's what we see of Crayak, Book 6. We then don't hear about this again until way down the line in Book 26, The Attack, which is where we're officially, or the Animorphs are officially introduced to Crayak by name. So the Ellimist comes down. We've seen him a few times, but this is the first time the Ellimist brings up Crayak. He comes down to the Animorphs and says, oh, and by the way, there's this almost like mirror version of me who's buggering everything up. You ought to know about him, because I'm about to throw you into a thing regarding him. So this is... Well, let's go through the quotes now of the Animorphs being introduced to Crayak via the Ellimist. The Ellimist continued. We watched the rise of other species throughout the galaxy. Helped at times when we could. We wanted companions. We wanted to learn. We imagined a galaxy filled with millions of sentient species, each with its own science and art, its own beauty. But it wasn't to be that simple. Approximately 100 million Earth years ago, we became aware of a new force in the galaxy. Not a species, an individual. He was a fugitive from another galaxy, chased out of that galaxy by a power even greater than he, greater than me. I thought you were all-powerful, Rachel said. The Ellimist smiled. No. I seem so only from your limited perspective. This is where we get into very unusual and confusing territory, because we're introduced now to a power greater than Crayak and the Ellimist, who kicked Crayak out of his original galaxy. If we go back to previous quotes from the Ellimist Chronicles, right at the start of this video, Crayak says, Ellimist, your galaxy has got a lot more opportunity for me than the galaxy I just left. Was that the galaxy he was kicked out of by this even higher power? Who is this even higher power? Because apart from in this book, we never hear of him again. Not even in the Ellimist Chronicles. Was it retconned? Maybe. Maybe it's God. Who knows? I don't think the authors are... I don't know if they're religious. I don't think they are, so... But who knows? It's fiction, isn't it? So as we now go through these quotes from the Ellimist explaining Crayak to the Animorphs, let's just have a look at the consistency between this narrative versus what we saw basically firsthand in the Ellimist Chronicles. How close is it, or how much stuff has been retconned, basically. He wants a galaxy cleansed of creation. His goal, I soon realized, is to destroy life. His method is to use one species against another, strong destroying weak, and then strong in turn being destroyed by the strongest still. He believes that there should be only one species, a single sentient race, which would be subjugated by him. What is this guy, a Nazi? Cassie said. Beth's curls shook as the Ellimist nodded. In the moral sense, yes. But he has different visions of what constitutes total power. He wants to be able to control the strands of space-time itself, not merely to see them and understand them, but to hold them in his fist and dictate the very laws of physics and nature, to recreate the galaxy in his own image, and someday to spread his power throughout all galaxies and to destroy the one power greater than himself. This is pretty standard for what we see in terms of consistency with the Ellimist Chronicles. A couple of, like, the general gist of it is pretty accurate, but there are details which are seemingly retconned by the Ellimist Chronicles. So Crayak's aim, according to the Attack, is to get control of the strands of space-time. He already does, according to the Ellimist Chronicles. He and the Ellimist are sitting side by side in this gamer room filled with all these threads, and they establish their own rules, and they say, right, we can do this, do that, but we can't do this and that. So That, as far as I'm concerned, is retconned. By the time the Ellis Chronicles comes along, he already does sort of control space and time. He just wants to be able to destroy things, whereas Ellimist wants to create things. We do get that idea of him wanting to destroy things, which is accurate. But there's also this idea of he wants just one species to be there, and he wants to subjugate them. That was never really brought up in the Ellimist Chronicles. It was just Crayak. So, again, was that retconned, or was it just adjusted slightly? And then finally, his ultimate aim, according to Book 26, is to defeat the power that was greater than him. No. Unless we're talking about the Ellimist himself, but then the Ellimist referred to this greater being earlier as if it was separate from the Ellimist, or the group of that forms the Ellimist, because he's referring to himself as a group here, plural. But you see what I mean. There are a few things here retconned. Let's look at some more quotes from 26. He is called Crayak, the Ellimist said, and then he looked right at me, and I knew before he spoke the words. You have seen him, and he has seen you. The Eye, the armless half creature, half machine. One by one my friends looked at me, challenging, questioning, neutral, skeptical, compassionate. When the Urk died in your brain, you peered across the line between life and death. You broke the dimensional hold that blinds humans to things beyond themselves, the Ellimist said. And in that moment, Crayak saw you. He saw that I had made myself known to you, that I had touched you, and he knew that you must, therefore, play some part in my plans. Crayak, the nightmare presence had a name, Crayak, the blood-red eye that watched me in my dreams. Soon, it had said, soon. I felt a chill crawl through my body, fear. The Ellimist said Crayak enjoyed fear. Did he feel mine now? 100 million years ago we fought, Crayak and I, the Ellimist said. I wanted to stop him, to stop his destruction. He wanted to eliminate me. As I stood on nothing, floating on nothing, stars began to dim and die. It was like watching a charcoal fire go from blaze to hot coals to crumbling grey dust. The result was something neither of us could tolerate. The battle we fought destroyed 1/10 of the galaxy. Millions of suns, millions of planets, a dozen sentient races. Before our eyes, or was it straight through our brains, ran images, flashes of creatures in amazing shapes, in sizes and colours that made me want to laugh in sheer wonder. I saw monstrous mammals and tiny insects, species that lived in the sea and others that floated on air, and one by one they went as dark as their suns. 12 sentient species, and more who would have achieved sentience, all destroyed for nothing. But Crayak was damaged as well. The fabric of space-time, the software, as you humans would say, the software that runs the galaxy was damaged, twisted by the sudden explosion of our power. Again, this is all sounding very familiar, like the basic stuff is all consistent with what we saw in the Ellimist Chronicles, but there's just a few things that differ. For one thing, and we will get into this in a little bit, the appearance of Crayak. He has arms and he's got like a Cyclops eye in the Ellimist Chronicles, but here we're referring to him as we saw him in Book 6, which is just this throne tower thing with an eye sat on top, basically, which maybe that's the way Crayak wants to appear. But we'll get into appearance stuff in just a second. It's just interesting how he's described so far in the Animorphs part of the story. There's also a little thing here where it says, in our fighting we destroyed 1/10 of the galaxy, which neither of us could tolerate. Which doesn't make sense because that's Crayak's aim all along. So, which doesn't make sense. Let's look at some more. All Crayak's knowledge of space-time was now shattered. The few threads he had gathered to him were yanked from his grasp. Millions of years of effort wasted. We fell back from our test of wills, our war. We knew then, Crayak and I, that we could never make war again. Not open war, at least. The conflict would have been carried on by different means. No longer a savage battle. Now it must be a chess game. There would be rules, limits. Earth is part of our game, Crayak's and mine. He would have the Yerks absorb humans and later be absorbed by some still more vicious species. but Earth is not the reason I've come to you now. So it's talking about Crayak having already got a grasp of time and space, but what little he had was yanked away from him. Then they both retreated, which doesn't match up with what we saw in the Ellimist Chronicles. It's close. It's close. And that last bit, well, not that last bit, but the second bit, where it says, well, we're in this place and we both came to the conclusion that we'd have to just do it via a set of rules and do it indirectly. That's accurate. That's how it was in the Ellimist Chronicles. It's some of the stuff before was just inaccurate to what we saw, which I understand. Maybe at that stage they hadn't decided to do an Ellimist Chronicles, so when it came to actually writing this, a few details were changed or a few details were forgotten, which tends to happen sometimes in this series. I think it was all they were wrong. Maybe. So why is the Ellimist introducing Crayak to the Animorphs? Well, it's to do with the Escort. For millions of years we have played our game, the Ellimist said, and we have lived within the rules, more or less. But now war threatens again. There is an impasse. A species I will not let Crayak take. A species he will not let me save. This species occupies a unique location in space-time. It is a turning point, and if Crayak can annihilate them, his power will grow, his goal become much closer. His forces become more deadly than ever. Including the Yerks? I asked. Yes, including the Yerks, who will benefit from changes I cannot explain to humans, or even to mighty Andelites, he added with a gentle, steel smile for Axe. Crayak and I have reached an agreement on a way to decide the issue, to decide the fate of the Escort race. If Crayak wins, they will be attacked, subjugated, and annihilated by another species. What species? Axe asked. The Howlers, the Ellimist said. You have heard of them before? I nodded slowly. Yeah, we'd heard of the Howlers. Crayak and I have agreed to decide the issue by a contest of champions, his against mine. He has named the Howlers themselves, a group of 7. I'm to pit my 7 champions against his. After this deal is offered, the Ellimist goes away and leaves the Animorphs to stew on this. And this is the point where the Animorphs suddenly turn around to Jake and say, what's this freaking Crayak thing that he said you knew? And this is where it's established that Jake has been seeing more of Crayak in his dreams than Book 6 lets on. I think there may be something else going on here, with the Ellimist choosing us. Everyone stared at me. Marker narrowed his eyes. The Ellimist said something about you seeing this Crayak. I saw him. When the Yerk died in my head, I saw him, and he saw me. And since then I've had dreams. Dead silence. I wished I'd kept my mouth shut. Look, dreams are weird. Like, who knows if they're ever real? But these feel real. And in the dreams I see him. Crayak. I shook my head. I know this sounds crazy. I just feel like these dreams aren't totally just dreams. I see him, and he sees me. And he says the same thing each time. What? Cassie put a soft hand on my arm. What does he say? Soon. He just says soon. So that is how the Animorphs, as a group, are introduced to Crayak. And I think this is the perfect place now to talk about the appearance of Crayak. Usually I'll do it at the start of the video, but I think we needed a lot of context before we actually went into what he looks like to the Animorphs over the course of their portion of the story. Because, you got the first part where he could put on a completely different guise. So I think it was inappropriate to introduce the appearance of Crayak at the very start. I think now is the appropriate point. So let's look at some quotes from the series looking at the appearance and traits of Crayak. So appearance and other miscellaneous bits. He was huge. No arms. Arms were irrelevant to him. He sat on what might have been a throne, or might have been a part of him. I couldn't tell. Machine? Creature? Both? Or something that was neither. He turned his single, huge, blood-red eye and looked down at me. I was on my knees, human again, hard steel beneath me, darkness all around. We meet at last, face to face, Crayak said, in a low voice that vibrated up through the floor, through the air, a voice so low that it seemed it would shake my very atoms apart. What? Not so brave now, little Jake, he mocked. Look at you, all of you, cowering. Are you frightened? I nodded. Yeah, I am, I admitted in a weak voice. But we won. And then there was a laugh that was as powerful as the awesome dread that flowed from Crayak. The red eye that was Crayak pulsed and seemed to grow, some sort of extension from below. A body of sorts, or a machine? A little of both, or neither. The thing that was Crayak bulged and shrank. Was it breathing? Did it need to breathe? Crayak went on, its voice low and powerful, like the rumble of thunder. The thing that called itself Crayak laughed. Crayak had moved, somehow, to the far side of the room. Suddenly, from its bulk, a muscled arm-like thing extended. Come with me, Rachel. A red spotlight illuminated the floor of the arena. Crayak hovered above us. Part biology, part technology, all destructive. There we go, that's about the gist of it in terms of Crayak's appearance. And how does it relate to the Ellimist Chronicles Crayak and the Dream Crayak that we saw from Jake? So in the Ellimist Chronicles, he was this creature that lived on a planetoid, and it looked subterranean or surface level. So it had one eye, presumably on some sort of head, and it had big muscular limbs. Fast forward to the dreams that Jake has of Crayak, and it's a throne tower thing without limbs, and then a great big eye on top looking around. Those are the two distinctive impressions that we get. So how else is he seen? He's got a low voice of thunder, which I think is mostly irrelevant, but interesting to note and useful to know when doing a voice of his. And he grows an arm-like extension at one point and beckons Rachel. Come here, Rachel. This arm-like thing appears. Would that be his real arm? It's impossible to say, but I'd say probably, like, the real Crayak, not so much real, but the representation of the real Crayak arm appeared. So he still has those, in a way, sort of. It's all very sci-fi, isn't it? He's part biological, part machine, according to what the Animorphs see of him, which is accurate to what he appears as in the Ellimist Chronicles. So with that implication, with that in mind, how accurate are the Animorphs' visions of what Crayak really looks like? Because he has arms in the Ellimist Chronicle, he has limbs, so not just arms. Theoretically, it's limbs. But then a lot of times the Animorphs see him, he doesn't have those, even though the rest of him seems to be accurate to how we're seen in the Ellimist Chronicles. It's just a bit wishy-washy and wavy and bibbly-bibbly-boo. But that's as far as you get for descriptions, apart from the fact that he seems to breathe, which is a very biological thing. So again, is that the physical representation of the real body of Crayak? Up to speculation, so let's move on. What happens next in book 26? We get introduced to the Howlers, which I theorized were types of creatures that were on the planetoid that Crayak was on in the Ellimist Chronicles. How are the Howlers used in book 26? The Howlers didn't evolve, they were created. Crayak? He nodded. Graffin's children and dozens of species were annihilated by Crayak's children. Fight me, Chi! The Howler taunted, when he realized his howl would not shake Eric's grip. I was shocked to recognize the language. He was speaking English. Crayak must have programmed it into this bunch of Howlers, programmed them to understand our language and to be able to taunt and question us if necessary. The Howlers are weapons of Crayak. And we saw there Eric explaining how the Howlers had eliminated Graffin's children, as well as many other races. He's also able to program them, so we can assume that these were... We don't know. Can we assume that they were created by Crayak? Because remember, back in the Ellimist Chronicles, this planetoid was covered with naturally evolved creatures and created creatures. The Howlers are hive-minded, and in a weird sci-fi sort of way, you know, they're not actually physically connected. It's almost like a signal comes out. So I reckon the Howlers were created by Crayak to be weapons, hence all their other traits. But like we discussed before, Crayak is he's got a very tricky way about him, and he makes you do bad things. Okay, so like I discussed with the Yeerks earlier, where you have to kill a host in order to kill a Yeerk, or at least debilitate a Yeerk, which, you know, turns you into a bit of a bad guy. You know, you have to kill an innocent civilian just to do some sort of damage to this Yeerk. He does something quite similar with the Howlers. So what? So what? We let them walk away just because they're not adults? Marco demanded. It's not going to be up to us, I said grimly. If the plan works, Crayak will... It's not just Crayak, Cassie said. We're the ones forcing the sound of machete guns in the streets outside the door, only a dozen feet from us. There was no Howler instinct to slaughter. It wasn't anger. That wasn't how they were built. Crayak had been more subtle than that. I'd expected the Howler morph to be like morphing some super predator, but the morph this reminded me of most was the dolphin. Howlers were playful. Howlers were having fun. He makes his ultimate weapons of destruction children, who are, in their own minds, completely innocent. So when the Animorphs are tasked to destroy them, they're basically killing... Not innocent, how would you describe it? But they don't know that they're doing wrong. It's like... Say if a child with severe mental disability, to the point where they're basically not capable of understanding what they're doing. If they kill someone, for example, are they innocent? It's one of these questions again, and I'm going to leave that. I'm going to put that your way now. Let's carry on with the AniLysis. But that's the sort of thing that Crayak's implemented here. He's a very sneaky bugger, isn't he? So this whole Escort thing, what was the point? What became of it? Let's look at some quotes that rounded off that Escort thing and try to have a guess at why it happened. These Yort could be related to the Yeerks, Axe said. They may be the same species, somehow separated long ago, perhaps carried from the Yeerk homeworld by some forgotten race. If the Yeerks knew, if the Escort ever made contact with the Yeerks, Tobias said. This was why Crayak had to destroy the Escort, and why the Ellimist couldn't allow it. Someday, maybe far in the future, the Escort would meet Yeerk, and the Yeerks would see that there was another way. What did you accomplish? No one knows the future, not for certain, but it is now more likely than it was before that 300 years from now the Yeerks will encounter the Escort. They will realize that they are related, and the Yeerks will see that there is a better way. That's it? Tobias asked. 3 centuries from now? How does that help us? It doesn't, the Ellimist said, but within 6 months Crayak will send a Howler force to annihilate a race called the Shaft Den. Instead of slaughtering the Shaft Den, the Howlers will try something different. The Ellimist winked. They will attempt to kiss them. Crayak will have lost his shock troops, and the Shaft Den will, well, no one knows the future for certain. Humans, the Ellimist said, as if he were introducing us. 5 humans, an Andelite, a Chi. It was a mistake allowing the Chi to escape from the doom of their Pemalites masters, Crayak said. The Escort will live, the Ellimist said. The eye showed no expression. The Escort will live. Then he looked at me. Sleep well, human, he sneered. I'll still be there in your dreams, and someday, when the time is right, you will suffer for this. I climbed to my feet, still holding Cassie's hand. I focused my mind on the Howler, and I began to morph. No one said anything till I was done, and when I was done, I opened my Howler mind to the collective memory that linked them all. I searched for the memories we had played for the Howler. I looked in the great memory pool for some memory of what had occurred on the Escort planet. Nothing. Some memory of us, of 5 humans and an Andelite and a Chi and Guide, but there was nothing. Crayak had destroyed the 6 remaining Howlers before those memories could poison the minds of all Howlers. He'd done what I knew, what I'd hoped he'd do. Essentially, the point of this was to disable Crayak's Howlers. And I don't know, was it really to save the Escort? Because we're talking 300 years down the line. And spoiler alert, by the end of the series, the Yeerks are defeated. The Empire is vanquished, essentially. Is the Ellimist saying that the Yeerks aren't truly defeated yet by the end of the series? And do the Animorphs consider that by the end of the series? You know, remember when the Ellimist said that in 300 years' time, the Yeerks might meet the Escort? You know, are the Yeerks actually defeated or what? Or is that just the Ellimist playing his little games, and it was all about just destroying those Howlers and implanting those memories to save the Shaft Den? Because it's that sort of tricky, mazy thing that the Ellimist would probably do. So the overall aim was to save the Shaft Den in the end, rather than the Escort. It was all about that. So that's what it is. And Crayak destroyed those Howlers. And that's unusual because he's not allowed to kill sentient beings. Are the Howlers sentient beings? Can something with a hive mind be a sentient being? These are all bigger questions than I'm able to answer here today. It's very speculative this episode, isn't it? But hey-ho. What happens next? Now is where I believe we're introduced to the main purpose of Crayak in the Animorphs side of things. So, considering that we start this analysis looking at the Ellimist Chronicles, and they say, now is the time to play our game, we have to operate within the rules, blah, blah, blah. This, book 27, is where I think we start to see Crayak's side of the game. Ellimists is the Animorphs. Most of them. Some of them aren't. Rachel is not part of the Ellimist plan, and he says that much in the last pages of the Ellimist Chronicles. Rachel was a happy accident. So Rachel wasn't meant to be there. And funnily enough, it's Rachel who Crayak seems to want. He wants Jake dead, but how does he want to achieve that? How does he want to eliminate Jake? And probably thereafter the Animorphs, which is Ellimist's game. Crayak is trying to undermine Ellimist's game by using Rachel to destroy Jake. How does he do that? He employs his wild card. Who are you? I snapped, trying to ignore the rage it had so clearly seen inside me. Trying to ignore the fear as well. This thing knew us. All about us. Who we were, what we were. All it had to do was tell the Yeerks. Then, even if we escaped, we were finished. Haven't figured it out yet. Oh, so slow. Allow me to introduce myself, it said. I am the Droad. It's a word from my species. It means wild card. Crayak, Jake said. You're his creature. Oh, very clever, Big Jake. Prince Jake. Have you killed your brother yet? No? Well, you will. Crayak sent you, Jake answered calmly. Payback? The Droad grinned. Then the grin disappeared. Payback, it said. You ruined his Howlers. Ruined his plan for the Escort. Crayak doesn't like you, Big Jake. Any of you. Then he looked straight at me. Although you have potential. We're introduced to one of my favourite characters of the series, the Droad, who is just full of sass and mischief, and I think he's great. The Droad offers Rachel a deal, and that deal is to turn on Jake. Part of me, and we will do an Annie theory on this someday, part of me thinks that Rachel was planted as Jake's cousin all along by Crayak, because he saw that Jake was being used, or about to be used, by the Ellimist, and he thought, okay, so you're using that. Well, what if I throw this other character in there that's going to be linked to him, who's going to eventually betray him? And when the Droad comes down, once they're established as Animorphs, the Droad comes down and speaks to Rachel and says, would you stab him in the back? Let's look at some more. Whale killing? Me? The Droad said in mock horror. No, no, no. That big lump on the beach falls just over the line into sentience. And I never kill a sentient creature. Your whale will survive. The rules, Mac said. You still must live within the rules that govern the Ellimist and Crayak. Yes, oh yes, the droid sneered. Mustn't upset the balance. Not directly, anyway. But create problems? Yes. Create opportunities? Yes. Play the wild card? Of course. And now, no more time for chat. The Yerks are here for you. Will they kill you outright? Or will they make your controllers? I don't care. Either way, my master will reward me. You're killing us, Tobias said. Putting us in an impossible situation. We can't morph here in plain view of the Yerks. You know that. You know we can't fight back. That's the same as killing us. Murder. Nonsense, the droid said. There's always a way left for you. That's also part of the rules. Now if you don't find it, well... The droid smiled, cruel, smirking. If you ever find yourself desperate, Rachel, at an end, in need, remember this. Your cousin's life is your passport to salvation in the arms of Crayak. So the droid introduces this concept into Rachel's head of, or you can bring you to the dark side. It's nice over here, nice and comfortable. We've got marshmallows. All you got to do is kill Jake. And Rachel, of course, in 27 refuses this offer, and then the droid just sort of disappears for a little while. There is some stuff in the middle here, and it's primarily in fact, I think it's exclusively in Megamorphs 3 and 4, where we get time shenanigans. And the droid is involved in that, and by extension, of course, Crayak. So let's just see the timey-wimey, wishy-washy, wavy, gravy time shenanigans that go on here. It's all part of a deal. My master, the great and glorious Crayak, and your friend, the simpering, meddling nitwit called the Ellimist, have a deal. Neither of them really approves of a mere Yerk possessing the most powerful device in galactic history. The rules, Tobias said. That's the problem. The rules of the game between Crayak and the Ellimist. Neither trust the other with the time matrix. They don't need it themselves, but they might give it to their allies. The droid put his hand to his ear. Did I hear a bird chirping? My master Crayak has demanded a price, a payment. A payment? Uh-huh, the droid said in a parody of coyness. What? One of you, the droid said. You can attempt to save your reality, put everything back where it belongs, end slavery, replace tyranny with democracy. Millions of lives saved, let freedom ring, glory, hallelujah. In exchange for one single life. Alive? I asked. The life of one of you. That is my master Crayak's price. One of you must die. This is all very weird, and it's hard to say if these Megamorphs books are just the authors having fun, which I believe the first two Megamorphs books definitely were, just the authors saying, let's have a play around with the rules that we set ourselves, and sometimes break those rules. 3 and 4 are a bit more questionable whether they fit neatly into canon or whether they're just sort of add-ons. But here, there's the Time Matrix, which was introduced in the Andelite Chronicles, and it's fallen into Yerk hands, and both the Ellimist and Crayak are like, we don't really like that being a thing. Why is it there? How did they not twist things so that that didn't happen? It almost seems deliberate, because surely they have the power to stop a Yerk stumbling into the wrong place. And of all the other things they're capable of doing, they couldn't do that. But yeah, it's probably some shenanigans going on in the background. But the droid comes to the Animorphs and says, here's the deal. You can change things back to normal. You can get rid of the time matrix out of these Yerk's hands, but we just demand one of your lives. And it does make you wonder, why would the Ellimist agree to this unless he knew that he could get away with it? Because... unless, because Rachel was blown apart, wasn't she? Jake died, and then Rachel died. Jake, being the Ellimist's main piece, he's the leader of the group that the Ellimist wants to fight his corner. And then, as we've already theorized, Rachel is possibly Crayak's addition to the group that he threw in there as his Wild card, very much like the Droid. Maybe the Ellimist thought, if we can just sort of get rid of Rachel, that eliminates a possible Crayak pawn, freeing my way. I'm not quite happy with the idea of saying that the Ellimist wants to get rid of Rachel because Rachel is some pawn of Crayak's, but it's possible, and that's up to us to speculate on. But Rachel and Jake both die. They both die in Megamorphs 3. And so it sort of adds the weight to my little theory. But only one of them is allowed to die. Jake dies first, so he disappears. But then, of course, by the end, the Animorphs win and are able to reverse time, much to Crayak and the Droid's chagrin. So they basically... Oh. Thank you, Bobble. Saying that, we didn't really get a reaction from the Crayak or the Droid. They just sort of disappear by the end of the book, which, you know, brilliant book, but very confusing as to whether it really matters in the grand scheme of things. We then get stuff happening in more Megamorphs fun. Firstly, and before we go into the main plot, it's just notable here that Jake is still having dreams about Crayak. Sometimes still, even now, I see the dark red eye of Crayak and feel his malice reaching for me all across the millions of light years. Just like in Megamorphs 3, the Droid is sent down with a deal for the Animorphs to fix some timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly stuff. My master Crayak offers you an escape. In his compassion, great Crayak has struck a deal with that meddling nitwit Ellimist. Crayak would free you, Jake. Crayak would free you all. All will be as it would have been if you had simply taken a different path home. We go through the plot of Megamorphs 4, where basically time has changed and then things get untangled, and then by the end, the Ellimist and Droid meet, and this is what they say. You cheated me, Ellimist, the Droid snapped. We had a deal, a trade-off. You were allowed to meddle with the timeline in the Valor contract situation, and we, my master Crayak and I, were to be allowed to tempt this young jackal here. He stabbed a finger at me. I kept my bargain, the Ellimist said. I have done nothing to bring about this result. The girl is an anomaly. She is sub-temporally grounded. You were careless. Much like in Megamorphs 3, it's hard to say how much this actually matters or whether the authors were having a bit of fun, but it's just interesting to see that Crayak is now using Droid to basically speak for him to the Ellimist. The Crayak is just away somewhere, not really involved. It's the Droid who's now speaking, basically his spokesperson at this point. But they're still playing their little games and they're having little disagreements with the rules, which is fun. It lines up with everything else we see where they establish these rules. And at one point, the Ellimist does say, we near enough stick to the rules, you know, most of the time. And this is just an example of them saying, hold on a minute, we set those rules, I think you've done it wrong there. And it just adds a bit of fun, and it does make sense in the grand scheme of things. How much this particular book matters in that, not so sure. We can't add much to our Crayak analysis from it, apart from this is what he did. Now let's move to the last we see of Crayak. And this is why I say the Rachel thing is his end game, and why I theorize that maybe Rachel was his pawn, because this is his last action. It's book 48, where Rachel is tempted, or they attempt to tempt her into joining the dark side. Rachel is having a series of strange dreams, which seems a very Crayak, godly being thing to do, and she sees a red light, which seems to represent Crayak, and flies innately toward it. I was flying right toward the radio tower, toward the red light. Turn, Rachel, turn! But I couldn't do anything but continue to fly straight ahead. Closer, closer! Something was wrong, very wrong. It was like being in the grip of a tractor beam. It was pulling me toward the tower, toward the red light. I was going to crash into it. I was going to crash, and I was going to burn. Then Rachel appears to be kidnapped by David. And there's a lot of stuff goes on, and she ends up morphing rat. And then suddenly, it becomes blatantly clear that something isn't right here, and Crayak and the Droid appear to Rachel. And she questions what the hell's going on, and she does eventually figure it out. What are you doing? I demanded. What's this all about? It's about payback, David snivelled. I laughed. You're telling me that the all-powerful Crayak is working for a rat? The droid giggled. Rachel. Who knew you had a sense of humour? No, Rachel. The rat works for Crayak. Whatever puny scores the rat has to settle are of no interest to us. No, we seek your help in a larger payback. We once told you we had hopes for you, Rachel. Do you remember? We still do. I want to help you realize your full potential, Rachel. We have watched you with interest and with growing admiration. Why are you content to follow when clearly you should lead? So this is about Jake? I remember now. You told him he would suffer for what he did to the Howlers. No, this is about you, Rachel. You could be so much more than you are. It sighed. What a waste it would be to see you finish out your days as a rat. It's pretty clear that none of this is really happening. Do you think I'm an idiot? Crayak, the conglomerate of life and technology, chuckled. What do you mean? I mean, this whole thing is an illusion. David's story? Rats can't be led like an army. They can't form alliances. And they can't decide to stow away on boats, which means that David cannot be here. He is an illusion, and I seriously doubt that I'm a rat. Look, you're all just a nightmare, a seriously foul dream. Excellent, Rachel. You are a skeptic, a good quality in a strategist and a leader. I think this is Crayak's end game in the war. I think if this rather, speculative theory is true, this is where the series truly ended. Rachel was Crayak's major piece of this puzzle. And he's now actually taken her out of what is real and put her in a corner and said, you need to do what I say. You need to change. This is my last chance now. He's obviously not putting on, he's acting all smug and superior and confident. But that's maybe what he's feeling on the inside. This is my last chance. I need to tempt her now. Let's give her superpowers. Let's say such things to her. I can free you, Rachel. I can free you from the cube. I can free you from David. I can free you from the morph. But first, you must free yourself from yourself. You would let me stop the Yerks? Crayak waved a dismissive hand. I would create you, Rachel, and you would do as you please. He turns her into Super Rachel and basically says to her, you can defeat the Yerks if you just give in. But Rachel, this is a brilliant book, by the way, she turns her back on Crayak. And this is the last we ever see of him. The big bad guy. That's the last. And this is in the run-up to the end of the series where the Animorphs triumph. It's very interesting. Was this Crayak's game all along? This will turn into an Annie theory down the line, so I'm not going to go too far into it. We're dealing with a mostly factual-based video here. So prepare for a video in the future discussing such theories. There is one quote in The Return that just strikes me as a bit strange when it comes to the Ellimist. And this is it. Crayak chuckled again. Good guys, bad guys. It seems so simple, and yet it is anything but. And that's the last quote I'm going to read you today. I just think it's an interesting one and one to consider, because he and the Ellimist are the quintessential good and bad guys, or so the series would have us believe. And then Crayak comes out with, there's no such thing with good guys and bad guys. And it's a bit like, well, you are like you're like the dictionary definition of a bad guy. What are you on about? Yeah, it's a strange one. But that's it. That's the last we see of Crayak. Book 48, a strange way to end it unless you buy into certain speculative theories. So what is this creature? Crayak. This eye. I think the physical descriptions from the Ellimist Chronicles are pretty much set in stone, and a lot of stuff we see, like him being part of a tower looking like the Eye of Sauron, is just an image he projects onto the Animorphs. Maybe, think about this, maybe Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, is that the name? Tolkien's books are obviously canon to the Animorphs universe. They were written long before Animorphs. Maybe Crayak knew about that book and thought, wouldn't it be cool if I just showed myself to Jake as something out of Lord of the Rings? Maybe that's going to be my headcanon now. It explains it. It means that I forgive the authors for their near blatant plagiarism. Maybe it was deliberate, and that was the reason. Crayak followed the very similar path to the Ellimist and almost seems like a mirror version of himself. He then enters this thread space thing and plays the thread game with the Ellimist. And the Yerks, and basically the Yerks are the battleground. They are like one of the central pieces, and then the humans come along. It's almost like Crayak sent out the Yerks, not directly, but possibly indirectly, to basically bring about this destruction. And even like the good guys fighting against the Yerks, you know, they'll be killing hosts. Like in the Hork-Bajir Chronicles, the Hork-Bajir, innocent beings, were slaughtered en masse, which could have all been part of Crayak's evil plan. And then the Ellimist chose these humans. He specifically placed at least 3 humans that we can be aware of, because we remember in that quote earlier on, it said that the Ellimist had touched Jake, and not in a Jimmy Savile sort of way, in a Jesus sort of way. Tobias, being Elfangor's son, was obviously an Ellimist interference, and Cassie, who is subtemporally grounded. So that's 3 of the Animorphs at least that we can be pretty damn certain that the Ellimist placed. Marco's mother was Visser 1 and Jake's best mate, so I think Marco, you can say, deliberate from the Ellimist. And Axe, who knows, quite possibly. I mean, it would seem to make sense, him being related to Tobias and Elfangor. It would almost make sense that he was the one Andelite to survive, so that's 5. Rachel, we know for certain, was an accident, according to the Ellimist, that she was never meant to be there, this one character. And it turned out that the last time we ever saw Crayak was when he failed to turn this one character to the dark side. Very interesting. Obviously, he has his spokesperson, the Droid, who is a fantastic character. I love him more and more every time I read him. Is there anything else I can really say about the Droid at this point? We've covered basically all the factual stuff. We've done all the quotes. A lot of it now is down to speculation and theory and other analyses that will come in the future. So I'm going to leave it there, and you lot can discuss what you think about Crayak in the comments and in further videos, because there is a lot. I think we've pretty much unpacked it. I can't think of anything. Let me think for a second. I will just finish it up then, just by saying that he and Ellimist, all the Ellimist stuff is just their game, and they are playing within the rules. And as we saw with the Droid, he's a bit of a stickler for the rules. He's like, you can't go breaking the rules, Ellimist. You can't be doing that. Yellow card. One of those and you're off. So, you know, he sticks by the rules, and it's all just a game to him. It's all just a game. Very much like one of his Howlers, isn't he? Anyway, thank you, Sauron, Crayak, for your contribution to the Animorphs series. It was godly, but at the same time, it seemed to work. A lot of sci-fi stuff thrown in there, a lot of inconsistency with the backstory, but I think a lot of that from Protect 6 was retconned. So yeah, thank you, Crayak, for all you have done for Animorphs as a series. What's going to be episode 51 of AniLysis? We're going to a much less important thing in the series. We're going to discuss the President's helicopter. Wonderful. So look forward to that one. Thank you very much for watching if you've made it this far. Some of these analyses will be very long for characters such as Crayak, and then some will be very short. So it's a mixed bag. Thank you very much for watching. I shall see you next time. Ta-ra from somewhere in the Animorphs universe.